It's Valentine's Day! Welcome to our latest LinkedIn Live. My name's Gareth. This is an event brought to you with love by the Sci-Train team. Maria, how are you doing today? How's it going? Everything okay?
I'm wearing themed. See, all red. I needed a thing with hearts, but I couldn't find it.
Balloons, hearts. I'm all pink. The room is full of presents, Maria. I can't get into the door of my house. So many deliveries of flowers and chocolates.
From you?
Absolutely. Well, what we thought we'd do today here live on LinkedIn as a Sci-Train LinkedIn Live event, of course. And if you're listening to us live, you can put questions and comments into the LinkedIn comments. Those appear in real time, so we can answer them if you're joining us, or if you're listening to this sometime in the future, you'll be able to also comment. But what we're going to do is what we've done is we've assembled a whole list of frequently asked questions that come from our webinar events. And if you're interested in booking a webinar event, you can jump on over to scitrain.com and learn more. But Maria, are you ready to give some love to the frequently asked questions from our researcher friends in this event today?
Let's do this.
Let's do it. Absolutely. How do you solve a problem with Maria and Gareth? Question number one, Maria. And these are real questions, of course. These are the kinds of questions that we get asked all the time in our different webinar events. Can I work on more than one research paper at once?
Yes, of course you can, because whether you're doing experiments or designing experiments or writing papers, you're maybe at different stages in your research for different topics. So a paper is something that comes up. It's not just one experiment and then you write it up. It's a story that builds on over time. So you can have multiple experiments and you can have multiple repeats of the same experiment, and you can start writing the papers concurrently. You can have 3 or 4 or 5, as many as you want.
Many people collaborate with lots of other researchers around the world, so they end up with multiple plates spinning, different projects on the go, different pots on the boil. If you remember that research cycle that goes from coming up with ideas to getting funding, writing up the project, submitting, choosing a journal, all the rest of it, you may have multiple projects on the go at the same time. So one word answer to this question is, Maria?
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. And it's a common question. Here's another one. Question 2. How should I structure my manuscript? How should I structure my next research paper? Any ideas, Maria? Any thoughts?
So it depends on what you want to publish. Different journals will have different structures of the article types that they accept. So most of the journals will accept original research papers, which follow an IMRAD structure, but that doesn't mean that all of them will. Some journals, for instance, in biomedical science, only accept case reports, and that has a slightly different structure. So it has to do with what is your hypothesis, what you're describing, and the type of article type that you want to get published.
You mentioned case reports there, Maria. What's a case report for those listeners who've never heard that phrase before?
It is where you describe the case of a single patient that appeared and what your diagnosis was, and what you found challenging in your diagnosis, or what you found challenging in patient management. And that is written as a learning opportunity for other people reading it.
So there are journals that publish just case reports, maybe in the medical and health sciences.
Yes.
This is why we always advise in our events to pick a journal before you start to write, because this question that comes up all the time in our webinars, in different variations, what to put in the different sections, how to come up with a structure for my paper, how to structure my manuscript. If you've got a journal picked out beforehand, you answer most of these questions before you even start, right, Maria?
Yeah. Yes, because it tells you usually the structure, so the sections that you should have in your manuscript, in the text of your manuscript.
Brilliant. So that's a good hack from our experience, pick a journal before you start to write. Don't write up your paper and then pick a journal. That's a less efficient way to go about the writing and publishing process. What about question 3? This is a great one, and especially relevant to all of you PhD and master's students who might be listening to this event now or in the future. Can I publish a paper from my thesis? Maria?
Yes, of course. That's the whole point. So if your thesis was well advised and you had a good research project that you managed to carry out, then yes, of course, just write your thesis and pick something from it, pick a story from it, and write a paper about it, or write multiple papers about it. Yes, of course you can, because whenever a thesis is deposited in the library, that is not um, a publication that is concurrent with a journal article. So it's going to be slightly different. So it's not a duplicate publication.
And that's a related question. If you publish a PhD thesis, and of course it depends on your university or even your country's requirements. Different regions, different universities, different countries have different regulations. When I did my PhD in the UK, we were not expected to publish a PhD consisting of individual research papers as chapters. We were expected to write up a separate body of work. But of course, some of the chapters had already been submitted or were about to be submitted to journals. So those were just included in the thesis as chapters, as papers. In other countries, you've got to publish to get your thesis, right, Maria?
Yes. And in different fields as well. So usually people doing a PhD in humanities will end up publishing a thesis like a book, because it's a slightly different process they go about. It's about analyzing arguments and theories and all of that. So you need to have a denser structure and not separate stories that you then bring together. It's slightly different. So you can still publish from your thesis, but it's just going to depend on your field and what is more relevant. And it's not just going to be lifting things verbatim from your thesis. It's not going to just copy and paste. You have to adapt it slightly for publication, because you're going to abide by the guidelines of whatever journal or publisher that you're going to publish with.
Get in touch with us if you have questions. We're always delighted to help, especially young researchers, especially PhD students. Do get in touch if we can answer any other questions related to publishing from your PhD thesis. Here's another question, very, very common one, Maria. The maximum number of words I can use in my research paper. I'd rather think about the minimum number. I'd rather do the least possible work. But what would be the maximum number of words I can use in my research paper?
So once again, depending on the paper, it differs. Usually publishers will have a set number of words that they like to keep your research paper down to. So original research papers are usually up to 3,000 words, 4,000 words in biomedical sciences. Reviews can be longer because you will have to condense findings from different papers. But once again, different journals will have different guidelines. And they can be more or less annoying on the word limits that they impose.
Yeah, you need to check the author guidelines before you start, once you've selected your journal. Of course, some journals very strict. Have a look at Nature, Science, very, very strict on the 1,500, 2,000 word main text guidelines. But again, depends on the journal, as Maria said. Again, if you have questions, we're always, always, always here to help. What about this one? This is a great one. And I've asked this question myself. Can I use someone else's figure in my article? Let's say Maria's just published a paper, has a nice figure in it. I'd like to use that in my next paper. What should I do?
Well, first, you need to get in touch and ask for permission and figure out who has copyright, because it may not be Maria anymore. It may just be the publisher that Maria published with that has copyright of the figure. Or you can adapt, redraw the figure if it's like a schematic or something that, if it's like from original research, if it's a graph or a chart presenting values, then to publish that, you'll probably have to include Maria as an author in your paper, and get her to do some work, because you can't publish a duplicate figure from what you've already published.
It's a very good point. First thing to do, because we're very polite people, of course, all of us, everybody listening to this, get in touch with the author or authors of the paper that you want to reuse or modify a figure from, and then check the kind of journal it is. Because if it's an open access journal, then probably the figure, like all of the contents of the paper, will be published under what's called a Creative Commons license of some kind, which means usually that you can reuse the figure with permission and with citation, of course,
yes,
with no problem. But if it's a paywall journal, a subscription journal, then the authors have probably transferred the copyright to the publisher. And in that situation, you're going to need to get in touch with the publisher to use a figure from a previously published article. It's ethics, also politeness involved in this one.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. Very important. Don't fall foul of plagiarism. All right. How can I get permission to use a figure? How can I do that? How can I do that? How's it done?
Well, we just answer that. Ask the person that originated the figure, or ask the publisher to which the copyright was transferred. Most of the time, if you're using from a figure from an original research paper in a review, for instance, you can ask the publisher, because they will be cited, and they are more than happy to give you permission with citation from a previous figure.
Absolutely. Until recently, I was an editor with a big publisher. Won't say the name here, but it rhymes with Rayler and Tansis. We would always get emails from authors asking us if we could reuse previously published figures, and we would just transfer those requests to the journal management office, the portfolio manager, and almost always they would say yes, no problem, unless it was going to be used for commercial purposes, in which case a separate licensing agreement has to be made. Yeah, so great question. Fantastic. Here's one for you, Maria, as a peer review expert. My article is currently in peer review. What's its status? And how can I find out what's going on?
Nobody knows. It's a mystery. It's the black void of peer review. Well, it depends on communication from the editor. You'll have submitted your journal, your paper, usually through an automated submission service that gives you an automated email to say it's been submitted. We have accepted your submission. And then you'll have a separate email from the editor saying, we have viewed your submission and it has proceeded to peer review. So that means that it's cleared editorial checks and it has gone to peer review. And then you have some time where they're trying to find peer reviewers. And then you have some time where peer reviewers are reading the paper, and then they're writing the peer review report. And then, yeah, it depends how long it elapses until you hear back from the editor. During that time, the only point of communication you have is with the editor. So in most blind review, which is the majority of the journals nowadays, it's single blind review still. If you have an ongoing, transparent or collaborative review, then you'll be in touch with other people.
Yeah, we have a question very similar to this in the LinkedIn comments. So we hopefully, Bikiombe, we've answered your question with this response that Maria has just given, like strategies for speeding up the process. If you've waited for more than, usually we say about 6 weeks, and you haven't heard anything back from the journal, now's the time to write a polite email to the editor, ask for some updates, maybe give something back to the editor, some additional suggestions for peer review. Where were you? We talked about this 2 weeks ago in our previous LinkedIn Live, communication with editors and peer reviewers. You can find it by scrolling down the Sci-Train LinkedIn feed or getting in touch with us. We'll send you a video of it after the event today. But that's a really great question. This is a big one, and we'll refer you to some other videos on this as well. But how does peer review work? Does peer review work, Maria?
Well, I think it's what we have that works best. It's not perfect, but it is what we have thus far that is kind of working. You submit your paper. It goes on to a nice gentleman or lady that is the editor. The editor or editor-in-chief for the journal reads the paper and gets it to their staff, who checks if it's plagiarized, if there's problems with the content, if all the ethics are in place, and all of the things that there is a Sci-Train booklet on how editorial desk checks work. And then after all that, the editors try to find peer reviewers. So they go through their networks or through automated systems, and they find people who would be willing to and interested in read the paper and evaluate it. After that, they give those people some time to read the paper and write a report. After they've read the paper and written the report, the editor evaluates the report again and kind of tries to compile things from several, 2, 3 peer reviewers, and then they will reply to you. They will send you an answer in the form usually of an email saying, or to get you back to the submission system saying that this is our decision for now, and those are the comments if you have reviewers' comments. And then most of the time, if you're lucky, what happens is that you'll have some time to reply to the comments or make some changes.
We could talk for ages about peer review. And of course, it's Valentine's Day. We don't want to bore you too much, but we do have lots of other training, lots of other webinars, lots of other content on this. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, it would be great to get a webinar, what about a bit of training for my PhD students or my researchers? Do get in touch with us at the end. That would be absolutely fantastic as well. How about this question, Maria? How are we doing with this one? It's really interesting. How do I follow up on a journal submission? We kind of also touched on this as well, but any advice for doing that?
Keep communication with the editors or the editorial staff. There's usually at least one email or a couple of emails that you can get access to communicate with the editorial staff. Depending on the journal and the size of the publisher, they're more or less responsive. But there's usually a way to get some answers.
Yeah, really important. And again, if you have questions, just get in touch. We can help you with templates, help you write emails, help you get the right kind of tone for those communications with editors. What about this one? This is a great one. Can I publish my research in 2 journals at the same time? Is that allowed, Maria? That's a bit naughty. Sounds a bit naughty to me.
Sounds a bit naughty, but it depends. What do you mean by research? Is it the same story? Is it the same figures? Is it the same? What are you trying to publish? If it's exactly the same paper, no. Not even in the same journal at different times. What you can do is, and this is really cool because I've worked in a protocol journal before, what you can do is sometimes whenever you have a paper that people keep emailing you questions about, how did you do this and how did you do that? What you can do is try to write a protocol paper, which means a detailed step-by-step protocol procedure of what you did that is interesting and can be reused by other people. That is not the results from your paper. That is a separate paper, but it is something that you can produce from your work in the lab.
Bit like a methods paper. That's really interesting. So I might do an experiment. I might do a study, publish the results of that, and then publish another protocol paper talking about how I did it. That's really interesting. I'd not heard about that before. What you can't do, though, like my friend used to do, is submit the same paper to 2 different journals or 3 different journals, and then wait to see which one accepts it first or gets it into peer review first, and then withdraw the paper from the other 2. That's very naughty. That's a complete violation of publication ethics, and you will get caught if you do that, because in most research fields, the peer reviewer pool is small enough that there's a very, very, very high chance that your paper will get sent to the same person. And that's how usually these things get caught, right, Maria?
Yes, it is very common because research papers are a very narrow focus, have a very narrow focus. So it's obvious to most editors that know the field who are you going to ask first to review that paper. And if you send the same paper to the same person to review from 2 or 3 different journals, then yes, you're in
Bit
trouble.
naughty. I mean, it is Valentine's Day, so we are allowed to be a bit naughty, but not that naughty. Come on
Not
now,
that
come on now. How do I determine if there's a conflict of interest? What is a conflict of interest, and how do I determine if there is one? And we've all seen those forms that we get from journals that ask us about this, Maria.
So some journals and publishers are much more detailed with this than others. But basically, there are 2 types of conflicts of interest: financial and non-financial. Financial has to do with whether you are employed by someone, whether you have any interest in a patent that's been filed because of the work, whether you've been compensated for talks and appearances, or you have provided, or if you filed copyrighted material before. The other has to do with personal interests. So whether you know the people that you were reviewing for or authoring the paper, whether you know someone in the editorial office, whether you're related to them, whether you've worked with them before, something that may favor people that are in a position to decide the fate of the paper in your favor or in your disfavor. That may be a conflict of interest as well.
So my father's the editor of a journal. Should I be submitting papers to that journal?
No.
Oh. That wipes out
Yeah.
half my CV. Whoops. Can I still publish in a peer-reviewed journal if my paper
well, go
has
back
already...
go back one. You can submit to that journal, of course you can, but your father, for instance, would not be allowed to have anything to do in decisions from your papers.
managing the paper? That would be a conflict
That
of
would be a
interest. Can I still publish in a peer-reviewed journal if my paper has already been archived or a preprint has been published or some other kind of digital copy is available? So if I preprint, can I still publish in a peer-reviewed journal? My answer to this would be almost always yes. Right, Maria? I think that would be my response.
Almost always yes, because most of the journals have guidelines towards it, that they accept something that's been pre-printed. What you can't do is publish exactly the same thing as the preprint. There's a thing called version of record that is the same idea, the same results mainly, but with different changes, and has with some changes that have to do with feedback from reviewers, that have to do with feedback from the editorial office, that have to do with different formatting because you've submitted it to different places. So a preprint may not be the version of record that goes into published in a journal. However, for instance, if you have a digital copy in ResearchGate, you can have it as a preprint and as the version of record of a paper. And most publishers are perfectly fine with that because that's visibility for them, and it increases the profile of their own reviewers as well.
Again, it's well worth checking before you do this, but we would always recommend that it is a good idea to preprint your research for a variety of reasons. Have a listen to our previous events on open research and open science, but there will still be some journals that have a problem with that. So if you're targeting a particular journal with your research, check their guidelines. It's always a good idea. Very, 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 very common question comes up all the time. What is gold open access? What is that, Maria?
That is the type of open access that's more common nowadays. That means that whatever you publish is freely available for people to read online. There's no embargo, there are no paywalls, there's nothing separating you from reading them. But to get to that place, authors have to pay article processing charges, which is annoying.
More than annoying, especially if you've got no money like me. You can't afford it and you want to publish your paper open access. There's an APC, and sometimes your university, your funding agency, your country, your national research council might cover that, but many times not, unfortunately. But that's what gold open access is, as Maria said. Any article that's freely open in that particular way. But on the other hand, what is green open access? I'm green with envy. What is this?
Good question. I am puzzled by it most of the time, so I'm going to get the question back to you.
Green open access, Kermit the Frog. This is where you put a late stage version of record, a late stage version of your paper that's not yet the peer reviewed and published version that goes into the journal, into the paywalled subscription journal. You put that on a recognized repository like a preprint platform or a site like ResearchGate or academia.edu. Shout out, checks in the mail, or your own website, for example. So not the final published version, but a late stage version like a Word document or a PDF that has not yet been approved for publication. That's green open access. Other people can still get access to the article, to the results, to the ideas, but they can't see the final published version. And different publishers have different embargo periods on this. You may find that your publisher is saying nothing can be online related to this final paper for 6 months or a year. But again, check with the publisher. That's what green open access is, though. Absolutely fantastic. So related to that, do all journals have the dreaded APC, the dreaded article processing charge, Maria?
No, not all journals. So there are some journals who have different types of models. Some you have to pay to read the paper, and because readers pay the price of that, then authors don't have article processing charges. And then there are some other journals that make both authors and readers availability to this freely available, and that's diamond open access, that neither the readers nor the authors pay to have their research published, and it is usually financed by higher level institutions.
I'm waiting for my diamond. I assume it's in the mail. I'm waiting. It was supposed to be delivered today on Valentine's Day, but I guess the postman hasn't arrived yet. Nevertheless, there you go. Articles with article processing charges. My article has been published, and this has happened to me a number of times because I'm a very sloppy person. My article's been published, and I've spotted an error. What can I do, if anything? What do you think, Maria?
Get in touch with the editor, and they'll usually publish a correction.
They'll usually publish a correction, yeah.
Yeah, they will usually publish a correction, and then the DOI from your article, original version, will be connected to that. So, and usually publishers, if it's a PDF, they will change the PDF that people see on the site on whatever abstracting indexing service you're using. So it's always the corrected version.
Very important to check the final version of your paper, the one that goes to the publisher for publication. Some open access publishers don't give you what we call a proof, or from the old days of publishing. This was called the page proofs, where you actually got to see like what your article was going to look like in the printed journal. You could correct it, you could change it, but you know, make sure you check carefully, because sometimes these corrections just can't be made. Which brings us romantically to the end of our fantastic Valentine's event today. Have a great day, everybody. I'm sure you're off out later for whatever you're going to do, dinner and all that kind of stuff. Maria, happy Valentine's Day. How's
Happy Valentine's!
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for
And you
listening
as
to
well.
us, and we'll see you again in our next Sci-Train LinkedIn Live. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.